Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks just another minute or two to arrive, and then we'll get started. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Aris Winger is our moderator today, and so I'm going to let him go ahead and get us started here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Afternoon for some of us at least. I'm Aris Winger. I'm Associate Professor of Mathematics at Gwinnett College and Executive Director of the National Association of Mathematicians. I am happy to be moderating this panel today on research on learning assistance and STEM education. Super important topic, and really trying to get across, some of the great ideas in STEM in alternative ways other than just from the supposed leader or professor or teacher in front of us. How is it that we can think about learning assistance this way? We have a great set of panelists with us. Rachel Funk is here with us, Valerie Otero, Kelly Bupp, and Paul Jacopovich. Lots of research here in this area that we're going to talk about and utilize and really think about models in terms of helping our students.
All right. So stop share and I'll share. All right. So I'm going first. Yeah, we're assuming that most people are aware of the learning assistant model, that these undergraduate students serve on the instructional team of courses, working alongside the professor and implementing the course and engaging with students. And so we'll show 4 different research that represent the broader research agenda of in the US regarding learning assistance, and I am the first one up. So as you saw, there's at least 82 papers that we've been able to find that actually are published, peer-reviewed published papers regarding the LA model. The LA model has shown many impacts: improved student learning outcomes in courses, decreased failure rates in courses, increased retention and completion across universities, STEM identity and leadership among learning assistants, increased satisfaction with the course and with the teacher, institutional change, that LA's foster a sense of belonging and inclusion in person and online. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. And there's actually been a whole review article that reviews the research on learning assistance. So one day, my graduate student named Lakin Top asked me, how does the LA model produce these outcomes? And I thought, well, I know how we designed it, but that's an empirical question. And so we set out to investigate that question. And so in this case, we interviewed intensive interviews with 24 students in a chemistry course. This is the only chemistry, everything else is math, fear not. But we only analyzed 2 of the 12 questions because there was all kinds of questions. Only 2 of them had to do with learning assistants, undergraduate students who serve on the instructional team. And then we verified our findings with almost 800 LA reflections from LAs themselves. And what we found was that everything that the students said fell into one of these 3 categories. I had expected knowledge and pedagogy, but for me, social emotional was a bit of a surprise at this time. In knowledge, they said LAs have general knowledge, like where to find mental health care resources. They have knowledge specific to this class since they had just taken it. They have disciplinary knowledge. They have fresh knowledge, unlike the stale stuff that we professors have. And they're invested in our knowledge development. And 18% of the statements fell into this category. In pedagogy, the students said that LAs, they explain better. They figure out what I know before offering help. They help us construct knowledge rather than just giving the answers to us. And they offer general assistance. And 29% of the statements fell into this category. In social emotional, they said LAs are like me. They understand me. They care about me. They're approachable. They're personable. They figure out what I know without making me feel dumb. And a whopping 50% of the statements fell into this category, really bringing into focus how does the LA model produce these outcomes? And so when we compare the way that the students are talking about the undergraduate LAs to the way they talk about graduate TAs, we gain a further understanding. They said graduate TAs, they know more or different content than LAs. They're perceived higher than us. They do not have knowledge specific to this class since they took it so long ago. In pedagogy, they said graduate TAs direct the classroom. They're more like teachers. They're in charge of grades. They did not really get what we're asking, and they explain sometimes at too high of a level. In social emotional, they said they're different from us. They're authority figures. They do not understand us. They sometimes make us feel uncomfortable. They stand over you. They're intimidating, but they're helpful. And we love our graduate TAs. Lakin herself was a graduate TA. But we do see that there is a very big difference in the way they're talking about the graduate TAs and probably the professors and the way they're talking about the undergraduate LAs. So we set out to build an explanatory model using the same data. So what I'll do now is go through a variety of representations in efforts of making a point. In knowledge, the students are seeing the graduate TAs and likely the professors as legitimate participants in the discipline and legitimate members of the institution. In pedagogy, they're seeing them as having control of information, control of grades, and control of the classroom. And in social emotional, they're seeing the graduate TAs and likely professors as hard to relate to and access. And yet these are the things that comprise the institution, the institutionalized practices in which professors are embedded. And yet the undergraduate students remain somewhat distant from these structures. And so when we think about the LAs, they're actually both a part of the student body and a part of the institutional structures. They're seen as legitimate members of the instructional team. They have specialized training in pedagogical content and inclusive pedagogies, and they understand how we feel. They know what we're going through, and they know how to interact with us. And so these learning assistants, I put these same data on 3 axes because there was 3 things and I couldn't help myself. But if you look at this, you see how the blue institutional orb, students move from institutional talk towards their own sense of self. Like if you look here in pedagogy, they explain better. They push me to do better. They figure out what I know. In knowledge, they have general knowledge all the way to they're invested in my knowledge development. And it starts with being approachable and it gets all the way to they're like me and they care about me. And so it's really providing the connective tissue or a bridge between the institutional practices and the student's sense of self. And LAs are connecting students to the academy. They're improving their academic and social integration and belonging. And maybe this is what is driving those valued outcomes. And there is a lot of research that shows a direct correlation between social academic integration and belonging and those traditionally valued outcomes. And here's just some of it that we know. And so just to bring the point home, I've re-represented the same data here in a Venn diagram. And here's what we as faculty and graduate TAs can do. We're great in the pedagogical content knowledge arena, but the LAs are adding this social emotional component to the classroom environment, making the discipline, the institution, and the class more accessible. It's a more complete instructional team. And when we look at the reasons that instructors give for requesting LAs, they enable and foster group work. They improve performance. They're more approachable. They have a different perspective. They foster engagement and motivation. And they're a resource for additional help, and they're thoughtful and intentional collaborators with the instructor. The one thing that we hear more than anything else is the word love. I love my LAs. The LAs love their faculty member. They love their professor. The students love their LAs, and the LAs love their students. So we really are building, it's not just implementation for one course. It's a cultural change model where we really do break down power structures. And this is the words of the LAs. So thank you. That's my 7 minutes. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of the other research that is currently going on. I will stop sharing. And we'll have lots of time for questions.
All right, so I'm up next. Nope, hold on. Maybe. There we go. All right. So I'm going to talk today about student LA interactions in the classroom and how often certain things happen and how helpful students find certain interactions. Maybe. All right. So this research was done at a large Midwestern university in Calculus 1 courses that were taught using inquiry-based pedagogy and supported by LAs. This was across 3 semesters. This was pre-pandemic, so this was fall 2018 through fall 2019. We had 303 total students across 7 sections of the IBL calculus, and 287 of them completed a student survey. The learning assistants in these courses really were facilitating group work. So group work was happening mostly all day, every day in these classes. So the learning assistants were really pushing the students for understanding, asking them questions about what they were doing, what they're thinking. And really, we emphasized in our pedagogy seminar to answer questions with questions, right? So we're really putting the responsibility on the students, but obviously we're supporting them as they're moving through their understanding and learning. The main data we have is from a student survey. There's both Likert scale and open-ended questions across a whole variety of within this IBL calculus course. And so I'm just going to focus today on the Likert scale questions related to the LAs. Okay. So I've broken these interactions down into desirable and undesirable, and that is with respect to supporting inquiry in the classroom, okay? So these are sort of desirable interactions that support student inquiry, where the LAs are asking students about their work, asking them to explain their work, and again, not directly giving them an answer, right? But instead giving them a hint, asking them a question to help them move them in the right direction, that kind of thing. So this is percent of students that report how often these things happen. So you can see these things are happening pretty frequently in the classroom. Man, okay. So now here are some undesirable interactions. And again, these are undesirable with respect to promoting inquiry, student inquiry. So we don't want LAs correcting the student work for them, right? We want them to help students figure out how to correct their own work. We don't want LAs actually doing problems for them, right? We don't want LAs telling them what the correct answer is, right? We want the students to really be the ones figuring these out. And so you can also see that there are some of these undesirable interactions that are happening more frequently than what we would like. All right, and then we have the helpfulness of back to these desirable interactions. So how helpful do students actually find these? So So we found that students call the LAs over quite often, and they also find that help to be helpful quite often, okay? But we also see on the other far side here, these interactions that we really think are the best kind, where the LAs are helping the students, but not directly answering those questions. Students are not finding those to be anywhere near as helpful as some of the other types of interactions that, again, are good interactions. So some of the big themes, right? So again, students are calling the LAs over for help quite a bit, and they're mostly finding the interactions helpful. And the most frequent interactions, desirable interactions that the LAs are engaging in are providing feedback, but then this sort of giving hints, asking questions instead of actually answering the student question. So the students find the feedback very helpful, but again, on the opposite side, they're not really, keen a lot of the time on the LAs not actually answering their questions. And then again, there's this, the LAs are also engaging in these undesirable interactions, in particular, correcting student work and telling and showing students how to solve problems at fairly high frequencies. Telling students if their answer is correct or incorrect. I mean, this one, sometimes we need this, sometimes we don't, right? This is so this is okay to happen sometimes, but still seems to be happening a bit more than we would like, given the training that we give to our LAs. So, sort of some big findings in here, right? So students found the interactions with the LAs helpful. They found some of the desirable interactions not so helpful. The LAs are engaging in some undesirable interactions that in particular align more with direct instruction pedagogies versus inquiry pedagogies. And something that came from another piece of this research, right, is that many students reported often wanting more direct instruction in these classes. So what we propose is sort of happening here, right, is that in particular for those students who wanted more lecture, right, the LAs were really their best option for getting that. So they sort of knew they weren't getting it from the instructor. And so they're calling the LAs over kind of hoping, and it seems like in a lot of situations they were getting that from the LAs, right? And then even though the students often found their interactions helpful and the idea of having those interactions helpful, right? If the LAs weren't actually directly answering their questions or showing them how to do things, then the students really weren't thrilled with that interaction and weren't pleased with the help that they were getting in those situations. So there's some work to do in helping students really understand and buy into the inquiry, and we've done some work on that front. And but there's a lot involved in this interaction with the LAs and the inquiry side of the classroom. So thank you all very much.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you, Kelly. Okay. So I'll be discussing LA instructor partnerships and the research that I've done in this area. And first, I'll talk very briefly about some prior research in terms of LA faculty partnerships. So LA faculty partnerships can be categorized along a continuum from mentor-mentee, which offers less agency or power to the LA, all the way to more of a true collaborative relationship in which the faculty and an LA are perhaps co-designing together, co-implementing instructional tasks. When looking at a specific pair of LAs and faculties, this categorization isn't necessarily fixed. So for example, in weekly content meetings, you might find that an LA is positioned as a mentee on some days, but then those roles could be reversed. So for example, if an LA is sharing what Valerie, I think, called fresh knowledge with instructors, then in many ways they might be acting more in this mentor role in relationship to the faculty member. For my research, I focused on a particular context, mathematics classrooms in particular pre-calculus, that were taught by graduate student instructors of record. Within this context, so active learning was the primary instructional model. Many of the graduate student instructors, who I'll call GSIs, were instructors of record for the first time. The GSIs and LAs are assigned by a convener who's also the one who's guiding the primary instructional model for the course. This differs slightly from several other institutions that use the LA model, in which a faculty member is the one who's primarily responsible for the instructional model used in their course, and they might be applying for an LA. In this context, GSIs and LAs are assigned together by the convener. The primary motivation for using the LA model was to increase the teacher-student ratio. LAs facilitate small group work. Other possible tasks, although this is dependent upon the GSI and the LA who are working together, LAs might demonstrate an activity during whole group time. They could help sequence student presentations, manage Zoom if they're in a hybrid or online setting, etc. But these tasks were always talked about in the research I conducted as rarely occurring. LAs primarily were working with students in small group work. So I conducted a qualitative case study that involved interviews with 18 GSIs and 9 LAs. For some of those GSIs and LAs, I interviewed them multiple times over the course of a semester. I collected data between summer 2020 and summer 2021. I also had several observations of pre-calc classrooms and of GSI LA meetings with one another. And my focus was on trying to understand how LAs and GSIs were positioning themselves in relation to one another, so how they were distributing power in that relationship. So what I found is that there were multiple different positions that LAs and GSIs had in relation to one another. These are the 5 most prevalent ones, but I'm going to focus on the ones that were viewed by participants as most valuable, specifically related to their major responsibility of supporting small group work. So one of these positions was LAs and GSIs seen as complementary instructors. So often this came up in reference to LAs having a more peer-like relationship to students. So kind of thinking back to that like connective tissue piece that Valerie was talking about. Another position was LAs and GSIs as partners or true collaborators. So within this position, this primarily was taken up when GSIs and LAs would communicate information with one another based on experiences they were having in and outside of class. So information about how particular student groups were doing, how students were interacting with one another, etc. And then the final position I want to highlight is LA's positioned as like a copy of the instructor. So this position, within this position, it was assumed that the LA used the same instructional strategies, same approach to interacting with students as the GSI, and that they were upholding instructional norms that the GSI or the convener of the course had set up. So I want to highlight some of the benefits of the partner and complementary positions, because these positions were most relevant in terms of their potential to offer benefits beyond just increasing the teacher-student ratio. So LAs often expressed appreciation for being able to provide feedback about the course to the GSIs and have that feedback be acted upon. GSIs often also expressed appreciation for such feedback. It helped inform them of how students were progressing, interacting with one another. LAs could also LAs sometimes acted as brokers of knowledge between pre-calc courses. So there were several LAs that I spoke with who supported multiple instructors, and so they might share like what one instructor was doing in one course with the instructor of another course. In the complementary role, so many GSIs and LAs focused on the value of students having multiple opportunities to develop a relationship with an instructor. There was one instructor in particular who talked about how the most important responsibility of having an LA is to be someone who was legitimately different than them. So they really valued this position. But there were also some tensions related to these positions. I'll briefly talk about or touch on two. So there were some GSIs who expressed concerns with how LA student relationships impacted their own relationships with students, particularly if they weren't aware of like if an LA and a student had like a strong relationship, and somehow they felt like that obscured their understanding of how that student was doing in the course. Can talk more about that if you're interested. LA's also talked about how sometimes it was a challenge when they were positioned as peers or friends, but also as like a copy of an instructor, someone who should be upholding instructional norms related to how students were engaging with content or each other. I think that's kind of close to time, so I will stop share, hopefully. There we go.
All right, let me find my mouse. And I think that I am last here. So my name is Paula Jakubovic. I'm from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I'm going to be talking about learning assistants from kind of the positioning of the learning assistants themselves and their experiences. So to kind of put some context to this, we had a Track 1 MOICE grant where we were really trying to develop pre-service secondary math ed teachers. And post-COVID, we flipped the model of the program to have them engaging as learning assistants. So phase part 1 of our project really focused on outreach. Phase 2 really has been focused on the learning assistants and growing them as future teaching professionals. However, we also have a partnership with one of our local community college, Metropolitan Community College, with the goal of creating a pipeline for STEM majors who might possibly be interested in becoming STEM educators. Again, COVID really had an impact on, I think, the pipeline aspect of it. But where we have spent the time with the research is really looking at both our math ed majors at UNO, as well as the STEM majors who are participating as learning assistants at Metro. So the structure for our space was, if they're at the four-year university, they were in semester-long internships. Metro works on a quarterly scale. And so we would have students who sometimes were one semester, sometimes were multiple semesters. If they went the route of just being kind of, I'm not sure I want to be a teacher yet, or I'm not sure I want to be a teacher, they were paid as hourly interns. The ones who were going into secondary math education were on a scholarship with a commitment to teach in a high needs school upon degree completion. So I think it's important to kind of give some context that some of these LAs were people who are in teacher education programs, teacher education courses, taking practicums and field experiences at the same time that they were working as learning assistants, and some were not. So really our structure is similar to what we've heard from the other presenters, is we have the learning assistantships and we pair them with faculty mentors, which we see as a critical part of the program. Part of the mentorship was an expectation that our LAs would be meeting with the faculty mentors at least weekly. And this was in part to do planning for the coursework, grading, any kinds of things like that, but also building those professional relationships and networks. Sometimes they were asking for personal advice or asking for advice about teaching and different, like, how do I negotiate this kind of situation that I'm in? So the faculty mentoring really offered a space for the like all around development for our LAs. The other thing that we had is they were originally meeting weekly, and now it's bi-monthly. For community peers, community of practice among the peers. So they have the space to really kind of negotiate kind of their own questions about learning assistantships, their own learning as mathematical thinkers. So they would work on like tasks from their own math classes together. And then as part of a program requirement, we had them do reflective journaling each week, just on the learning assistantships. So the journal prompts focused on things like professional development that they were either doing or sometimes organizing. We had LAs who have presented at conferences about their experiences learning assistantships. They have provided workshops and some opportunities on campus and off campus, thinking about the community of learners and their interactions with both the other LAs as well as study groups that they would host as part of their learning assistantships. Sometimes we get asked to do, or they would be part of community outreach, mentoring, which we found to be something important to add to our journals, in that we initially with the project thought that faculty mentors were going to be a big part of what the learning assistants said was valuable about their experiences, and they almost never did. So as we started being more intentional about asking them about to think about and reflect on their mentoring, we really had some rich data come out about those relationships and partnerships between university faculty and our student LAs. And then we have asked specifically things that they were learning about mathematics, about teaching, about leadership, and then just about learning the art of lesson planning and thinking about teaching. For our study, we collected journal entries from 14 participants from the University of Nebraska and 10 from the community college in 2022-2023 academic year. And we used Winger Trainer and Winger Trainer's value framework. So this is positioning in social learning theory, the idea that value can be created at a variety of levels. So the idea is immediate value is I'm finding in the moment what I am experiencing is worthwhile in some way. I am learning something that is just having kind of an idea or an expression or an aha moment. That can transfer into potential value when going from the in the moment, it becomes thinking about how I might apply this in the future. So this is an idea that I'm going to file away and I might use it at some point. And then the transfer from that to applied and realized value is that applied value, I am actually going to be trying this thing out in practice and kind of negotiating, maybe taking on a new teaching strategy, a new strategy for connecting with students in the classes, advice from a mentor, something that I observed the faculty member or mentor doing, and then realized is it becoming an internalized part of their sustained kind of teaching philosophy and practice. So we use this to code the journal entries. One of the things that was not surprising about our findings is the majority of our codes landed in the immediate and potential value. So a lot of the time, because these are pre-service teachers or STEM majors, and in some cases, maybe their first experience as a learning assistant, they're having lots of in-the-moment ahas and thinking about how they might apply them in the future. Those learning assistants who were in the position for more than a quarter or a semester tended to be the ones where we started to see more of the applied and realized value. So the length of time that they were in their learning assistantship really impacted that. When it comes to the value for pre-service teachers, it's probably unsurprising our findings that they were learning new things about mathematics themselves. So the experiences that they had in working with students, they were having to understand and grapple with the mathematics at a deeper level. And then thinking about effective teaching and some of the practices that go into that. So like the other presenters have talked about, rather than taking over and explaining the answer or walking them through the steps how to do this, if I want to be involved in active learning and inquiry, my role is more of a facilitator and someone that's asking and posing questions versus giving the answers. And then thinking about how students learn. A lot of the reflections on student learning were around the idea of differentiation, that everybody is coming in with different background knowledge, different learning points, and they have unique learning needs. An explanation that works for one person doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And then finally, those mentoring professional relationships, like I had kind of talked through already. If you're interested in some of the data, the QR code just takes a link to a Canva page that has some of the quotes that kind of highlight each of those. But for sake of time, I'm going to keep going. So when it came to our pre-service teachers specifically, we learned a couple of lessons in terms of implications. It really mattered who the faculty mentor was. The faculty mentor's teaching beliefs, their willingness to give up that gift of time from their busy schedules to meet with the learning assistants and build those relationships. For us, that meant having really proactive partnerships. So we had teacher education and mathematics department involved in the grant and the project. And so there was a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration between departments to identify faculty who were interested and would be high quality mentors that would allow our learning assistants the best experiences to grow. And so one of the things that we learned kind of the hard way was preparing the faculty for the fact that these learning assistants are maybe not your typical learning assistants, in that they had teaching experience already from practicums and things like that. So helping the faculty to understand you can throw them in and they can start helping a lot more actively than maybe some of our STEM majors or non-teacher education learning assistants might feel comfortable with. The pre-service teachers also felt that it was really low stakes. They got all these opportunities to try out teaching without it being a graded experience or something that was really high stakes like a practicum. And they got to see kind of that mentorship and the collaboration happening. When it came to community college students, they saw a lot of the same things. They saw the value in learning about teaching, even if they weren't planning on becoming teachers. We had one intern who was planning on being a nurse and talked about the idea that, like, I am learning things that maybe down the line, if I am becoming a leader in the nursing field, I might be doing some professional development or doing some teaching down the road. And I've learned a lot about that. Like the other presenters, supporting near peers was really something that they found to be a positive and worthwhile experience. But I think one of the things that was unique about this is even though they weren't going to be teachers, they did still find value in the experiences in terms of their personal development and transferable skills. And so thinking about things like building their confidence, students who were maybe not used to being in front of the class or taking the lead, having conversations with peers that they maybe don't know as well, and having kind of that they are peers, but not quite. I know Valerie talked about that, kind of they're part of the institution and the students see them that way. But at the same time, the LAs may not see themselves quite that positioned with that expertise and that comfort level just yet. Other things they talked about were the resilience and adaptability, that they had to learn how to pivot, how to be flexible, how to change things on the fly. And even though that is a teaching, like it's a great teaching practice, it's really a great practice for any career field. And then they really talked about communication and leadership, and how to develop those skills, both communicating with peers, but also communicating with people in the professional field, and building those relationships and learning how to advocate for themselves and take on those leadership positions. So again, I have a QR if you're interested in seeing kind of some of the data, the examples from the quotes, but I also am keeping an eye on the time. And I think that I am about out of time. So just implications, I think, for all LAs is really they get the content knowledge. For community college students, extending engagement beyond simply attending classes can really help with retention and help them to build connections in a way that sometimes two-year college students don't have the same, at being commuter campuses, they just don't have the same opportunities that traditional four-year college students may have. And really building, fostering like relationships and networks and thinking about retention and recruitment in STEM fields. So here are some of the references if you're interested in finding out more about our work. A lot of it's using the value framework. And then if you want to find out more information, oops, I will maybe put that slide back with my email.
Thank you, Paula.
Sharing.
Thank you all so much for that, all of the research that you've done in this really important area. We'll open up the floor for questions. You can start with a question from Michelle for Kelly. What kinds of activities occurred in the pedagogy seminar?
Thank you, Michelle, for that question. As I said earlier, our data was combined from, excuse me, from 3 semesters. And that first semester was the first semester that we had LAs. And so when we started out, the seminar was more based on research around inquiry-based learning, and helping them understand that. And we realized that that wasn't really serving serving the LAs like it needed to. So what they really needed was more practical things. And so we did change what happened in the seminar over the course of those 3 semesters. And actually a lot of our outcomes changed as well, with sort of different adjustments that we made throughout those 3 semesters. We do have a publication that talks about sort of those changes from semester to semester in key areas, but we switched, and so it became more practical in terms of, we would talk a lot about what's going on in the classroom. What are students getting? What are they not getting? How can we help them understand this? How can we help them understand that? How do we help the groups work better together? So, we had a lot about facilitating group work and questioning strategies, right? How can we better like probe into their thinking and really get where they're at? And also, as sort of Paula was saying, right, really about the mathematics, right, was talking about, okay, so like, when students aren't really getting this, but I'm kind of not really getting it either, right? Like, how can we talk more about what this is and how I can better, you know, again, keep pushing them through these mathematical ideas without just sort of resorting to, well, okay, this is how I know how to do it. I don't really know why I'm doing it, you know? And so helping them really understand some of the mathematics as well. So we talked a lot though, yeah, about what was actually happening in the classroom around facilitating group work, questioning, and actually understanding the mathematics.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wendy has a question for Rachel and or Paula. What kinds of skills, knowledge, beliefs do you think people need to support LAs as their mentor or seminar teachers? How do we get folks to build those skills?
So I have a few thoughts related to this, but I think one big belief that's important is a belief that LAs should have some agency in the relationship and should be brought into a conversation about what that looks like with the instructor. And that's easy for me to say. It's not necessarily easy to implement, but I think that's really important to having.
Well, what makes it hard to implement?
I think it makes it hard to implement when you have a lot of different obligations, like departmental obligations. When you think about, thinking about my particular context that I studied, a lot of the GSIs were instructors of record for the first time. So some of them didn't necessarily have some of the confidence built up as a teacher that faculty might have. And so they have some struggles with the beliefs of like who they should be as a teacher and like who has ownership or right to have a strong relationship with students. Like it's a complicated but important thing to have a conversation about. I will note, just connecting to Paula's study. So I think the healthiest partnership that I saw when I conducted this study happened when the GSI themselves had some secondary teaching, like they were prospective teachers when they were undergrads, and or they were LAs themselves when they were undergrads. So they had built up some of that like skills awareness of what it means to be on the other side, I guess, as an LA. And yeah. So.
Paula, did you want to?
Sure, I can add on to that. I think, it can be hard to give up that control to help LAs build that agency. We do meet with our mentors at the beginning of the year just to kind of go through, like, here are kind of the expectations, here are who our students are, and here are some of the things that like might be good for them to do in the classroom. So I think when it comes to like helping to support mentors, having that mindset that we're building capacity for future teachers, future STEM professionals. And so there really has to be a lot of open-mindedness that they are, just like our students are coming in with different experiences and different starting places. They do have to, it is a sacrifice of time to put in the relationship building with the LAs, but I think that's huge. Because those opportunities to have conversations is where, you know, sometimes the novice doesn't know, like when I'm watching effective teaching in the moment, it's hard to sometimes name, like, what is it that the instructor is doing that is really helping to engage students or support the inquiry, or to motivate them to keep going when they're like struggling or having that challenge. Sometimes we pick up on that by observation, but being able to just kind of like peel open your brain and like say, this is what I do in the classroom to help them understand those intentional moves that are being made. I think it's really important for mentors to understand, like, we sometimes do things without realizing how intentional they are, and being able to unpack that for a novice. Sometimes we take for granted that they're going to pick up on those things. The other piece, just knowing, like, I think the relationship building over time can shift that relationship, not just with GAs and LAs, but also with faculty. So I didn't actually circle back to the quote that was in the title of my slide, was "You're a person who knows how to teach." And we had an LA who had been working with the same faculty mentor at UNO several semesters in a row. And in one of the reflections, Annie had said, Annie is a pseudonym, Annie had said that she's like, at one point, my mentor turned to me and said, well, what do you think we should do? Because you're a person who knows how to
Mm,
teach. And it was like this shift of like viewing them as maybe a subordinate or a student. And again,
mhm.
I think like going back to that idea that we can give them, if we give them the agency and we give them the support on what to do with it, and can continue to like help build. Maybe it's just walking around and answering questions the first couple of weeks, but then how do we build on that? And maybe they're going to present a solution, or they're going to like help facilitate a small group, and starting to like really just slowly build. So I think we have to have that mindset of being a mentor and a coach, not just a faculty and an LA.
Excellent. Other questions? We got some comments in there also. I had a question about, I have like a million questions. This was so useful. So, okay, so I have a question. Like, so for a class that doesn't have an LA, like what are the conditions in which we can go to a department head and say, it looks like this space would really benefit from an LA? Like, what were the, like, if you could come up with the 3 to 4 things that were like, be like, okay, this class needs an LA for sure. What would those be? And that's to everybody. Valerie, let's hear from you. We haven't.
Well, I mean, that's a really great question. So, and that's one that we struggle with all the time. My partner, Lori Langdon, my partner in crime with the LA program at CU Boulder, is here also representing the LA Alliance. But it's almost just like some of the other speakers are pointing to, it's an opt-in program. And so if the faculty member
Mhm.
is not engaged, then
Mm,
so because it's almost like, does this course need LAs? Is this faculty member willing to put in the work or interested enough so that they can, and it takes about 3 semesters for a brand new faculty member to get their to get their own personality, their knowledge, their
oh,
understanding,
interesting.
into place. So we give them, we give them 3 semesters, and then we, assist all along the way. So it really is a much broader program than here's an LA, put them in a classroom. It's a
Mm,
relational leadership program where we're all working together to try to build a campus that is more responsive to the students. And so the LAs give voice of the faculty to the students, and they give the voice of the students to the faculty member. And so one of the things that our campus has tried to do is to say, here are the criteria that are needed in order to, place LAs, but when one
mm,
might be a high DFW, a high failure rate course, like calculus, for example. But unless that faculty member is willing to put in the time and the effort and the energy, then they won't see the results they need. So you can't push LAs on people. And so the best
hmm.
results we have had is, that's why we built LA Campus software, so that all faculty can apply to get LAs, whether they're in African dance or in Calculus 3. And all students can apply to BLAs, thereby opening up and making a more equitable system. So the question of I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question of how do we know what courses need LAs? It's a matter of deciding for yourself as a faculty member. I don't use LAs in my physics course because I've been lucky
Mm,
to have the enrollment at 28 students, so I can do the work of the LAs. But some of the courses that have 100 to 500 students
mm,
need to have students LAs running around, giving voice to the students and helping. So
yeah,
that's an answer that says it really is. It's a sociocultural system that's at
yeah,
play here. I
yeah.
see another
But
question.
you are kind of implying the size also has something to do with it also.
I think the size has something to do with it. And
Mm,
like, for example, some of the courses that are upper division, for example, in our psychology courses, there's some really challenging courses, those capstone courses that are smaller, but that the students need the care and support from
mm,
LAs. And so those
mm.
faculty members
Yes.
themselves, they self-identify about, I need help, and those students need help. And so I'm going to apply for LAs. And then we
Yeah.
go through the process of looking at their, plans. And then we can say, you know what? You don't need one LA, you need 2 LAs.
No, that's great. All right, I
All
got some
working.
hands here. So and we're
Yes.
bumping up against time. So I got Corey, Scott, and Nicole wants to make an announcement about the follow-up panel to this. Corey, go ahead.
All right, I'll try to make this quick. It's not a question. It is a shameless plug, or in fact, 3 shameless plugs, but I think that they are all of interest to this community and related to all 4 of the speakers, as well as the last question. The first is just a paper that I'm throwing in the chat that is going to be published in Primus that compares the different models of peer instruction in mathematics across the California State University system. LA is one of those models, but there are several others like SI and PAL and PLTL and all these others that have a lot of structural and pedagogical similarities. And so we kind of compare what these look like on different campuses within the CSU system. And it's really written for practitioners, and partly getting at the last question about, how do you get these things started, or how do you get these things rolling in a certain department or in a certain course. And this came out of a seminar series during COVID that Valerie was one of the speakers at. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. The second shameless plug is just my own program. We've done a lot of studies on both the student success, but also we're working right now on the career success of our, what we call facilitators, and how much money they make, what industries they're employed in, what types of soft skills they've learned. So I'll throw another link in the chat about that, because we've done a really rigorous study I think we have about 400 former facilitators who are graduated out in the workforce and using these soft skills. And then lastly, I'm organizing a contributed paper session at MathFest this summer that is called Peer Support in College Mathematics. And I think probably everybody in here could contribute to that.
When is the deadline?
So it hasn't even opened yet. So I would
great.
throw a link if I had one, but MathFest will be in August. It'll be in Sacramento, which is where I'm located. So if anybody's intending or considering coming to MathFest, there will be a session, Peer Support in College Mathematics. It's open to everyone. So I'd encourage everybody to come and share your
And can you put your email in the chat?
Yes, I will. And now I will stop
Excellent.
talking. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Nicole, and then we'll go to Scott.
Right. So asking what happened in the pedagogy class, or that Kelly was talking about, was a great teaser for our next panel that will happen probably the end of March, maybe early April. And we will actually talk about how do you train learning assistants. So be looking for that to be coming to your inboxes soon.
Excellent. Thank you. Scott?
Because of the social emotional component, I'm thinking LAs could be particularly effective to create sense of belonging in entry level, but I'm going to describe what I mean by entry level. So I have two types of courses in mind. Freshman Calc, first semester. The other, the first proofs course in the math major, because I think in general, our math major programs don't create much sense of belonging, and the proofs course is always very challenging for students. So it's a key moment to try to foster belonging. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we are in our current soft ending. So if you have to go, we appreciate you attending. Let's thank our panelists for their amazing work. We're going to hang out until the top of the hour. But otherwise, thank you all for coming, and we'll just hang around. Thank you. So you all really helped me. So in my mind, I was just like, every class should just have LAs. But Valerie, you helped me. You all helped me in lots of ways. But Valerie, particularly your last comments is that, in theory, that would be nice, but there are responsibilities that the professor just has to have and be willing to do before we would subject, right, someone to, working under them, with them, right? You have to be qualified. right? To have a learning
You at
assistant.
least
Yeah.
have to be enthusiastic. You at least have to be open as a learner. You have to realize
Yeah.
that teaching, like science, like math, it's not done. You're always
Yeah.
learning, you're always reinventing it, and you're keeping up with the new technologies, the new people, the new times. And so they at least have to be open. And we've found that our faculty are very receptive to any kind of consultation that we're willing to provide. And the program itself has a lot of weight to carry to support those faculty in this process, because it's scary to try new things this late in your career, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot of human interaction going on, and it really does answer
It's required.
what
It's
makes
required. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's powerful. Other comments, thoughts?
I was just going to say, related to what Corey brought up with his paper, looking across these different programs, they can really dovetail together nicely, right? So if you do have that course where maybe the faculty member doesn't have the time, or isn't, for whatever reasons, not able to, work within LA, but they need extra support, that's where something like the SI model might be, a place for some extra student support there. So I think also looking at where the LA program is positioned alongside some of these other peer assistance models, and how can they be leveraged to deploy where they're most needed and will get most use. Is another.
Yeah. So it's not either, it's how do they complement each other? How do they, yeah.
Absolutely. And so don't hesitate to always be in touch with the LA Alliance. We have a website. We have, 6,000 people that are members, and then we can advertise various ongoing events like even this on that website, so
That's
that
great.
more people can be involved and hear from all the diverse experiences of the community.
Excellent. Other comments, thoughts?
I also want to add that as a chemist, I always appreciate being among the mathematicians. And I'm always trying to understand, even on our own campus within the math department, like the level of complexity of like all of these GSIs working under these, math czar or whatever.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
called at your institution. So I always feel like there's already some network just within our broad LA program, but then you
Yeah.
zero in on the math department itself, and
Yeah.
just how, I'm still always learning and trying to appreciate
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and how challenging that is when you have like GSIs who,
Yeah.
also need support for what they're doing. So just saying, it's good to be among you
Well,
all,
I appreciate
and to be
that.
learning more about your context as well.
Yeah, I was talking with Michael Dorff, who is very much Tipsy related, and he was running a calculus section with 400 students. And then, so it was him, he had a number of TAs, he has graders, he has the students. And yeah, you're running an organization. Like, like you're running your own small organization when you're doing that.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So the LA Alliance is soon to have a little page with research, and then there'll be a link that as we work in the next few months, there'll be a link for you to upload or your citation, so we could get all those papers in
That's
all the work
great.
that everybody's doing in a place where we can find it with it's a search keywords, so people can find.
And so the mission is to just give best practices. Are you trying to get more LAs in the classroom? I can also just go to the website, but
Yeah, supporting people. You might not
support, yeah.
you want, but supporting
Yeah.
all the great people in this world that are doing the hard work on the ground, working with the students, and that's the faculty, the graduate students, and the LAs, and the students themselves that are not making the decisions, but are
Yeah.
blood, sweat, and tears. And so we're just here to support each other and make sure that everybody has the resources that we need to do our best to support the students.
Yes.
I just want to add that on the TPSE website, under the teaching strategies and practices, we also have curated a lot of resources on inquiry-based learning and some on learning assistance as well, under some of those categories. So we also have resources there, looking at, in particular, those connections, right, between the inquiry and the LAs. So I find it, this is kind of a question, I guess, maybe more for Valerie, because you have such a huge program. So for me, the LAs are really an essential part of helping inquiry happen. But it sounds like you have classes that use LAs that are not inquiry based, right? So the LAs are not serving to support inquiry in the classroom, but have different roles or doing different things. Is that correct?
There's a lot. There's as many models as you can imagine, but in one requirement we have for awarding faculty members LAs is that the LAs are interacting with students. So there has to be some form of student interaction, and the faculty are learning a little bit over time, a lot over time. So a lot of the program is really a faculty learning program so that they can ease their way in. Not everything is going to be no textbook like my physics class, you know what I mean? But I think that we have to meet the faculty where they are and do our best to help support the interactions that student voice is happening in the class.
Just like Rachel brought up with LAs being knowledge brokers, having LAs across departments and then having them all together in the pedagogy course, they are brokering knowledge across the campus more broadly. And then, yeah, the challenge is how, LAs in all of those settings, what is it that they need to learn about their interactions with students? Again, whether they're in a pre-calc course using inquiry-based methods, or like Valerie said, the African dance course and everything in between.
So come to the International LA Conference or a regional conference or the E-Series workshop. You can find all those on the LA website. And then we're going to get to work on getting better about linking communities like TPSE so that people can find the like-minded scholars, in wherever they're going, and just cross-linking each other and being in touch. And thank you so much for having us here and having this great opportunity.